The wind carried the scent of iron and decay through the frozen valleys of Mournhall. Winter had settled over the land like a shroud, turning the forests into skeletal monuments and the rivers into veins of ice. In these remote corners of medieval Europe, where civilization feared to tread, legends were not stories. They were survival warnings whispered by firelight. Serena Valen pulled her dark cloak tighter against the cold as her horse navigated the narrow mountain path. Her short black hair, cropped close to her jawline, in defiance of custom, caught the pale moonlight. Those who saw her face, delicate features that seemed carved by angels with high cheekbones and lips that might have graced cathedral paintings, often made the mistake of thinking her soft. The scars hidden beneath her clothing and the coldness in her gray eyes told a different truth. She was a hunter. More specifically, she was a vampire hunter, one of the last of an ancient bloodline trained in the ways of destroying the undead. Her family's legacy was written in ash and holy water, in wooden stakes blessed by dying priests, in silver chains that had bound creatures older than kingdoms. The letter in her saddle bag bore the seal of Baron Rothmer, a desperate nobleman whose lands had been terrorized for months. Villages emptied, livestock drained, children vanishing under moonless skies. The signature of vampire predation was unmistakable, and at the center of it all was a name that made even seasoned hunters hesitate: Lord Kyle Darvin. Serena had heard the stories. A vampire lord who had walked the earth for over 1,000 years, who had drunk from the throats of crusader kings and pagan queens alike. Some said he could command wolves with a whisper. Others claimed he could take the form of mist or shadow. The folklore painted him as a creature music of terrible beauty and merciless hunger, a monster wearing the face of nobility. The payment Baron Rothmer offered was extraordinary. Music enough gold to buy a small estate, to retire from the hunt, to finally know peace. Serena had stopped believing in peace long ago, but the money would be useful. Silver bullets were expensive. Holy relics didn't come cheap, and information about vampire nests required bribing the right church officials. As Castle Darvin emerged from the mist ahead, Serena felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the hunter's instinct that separated the living from the dead. The fortress was a ruin of ancient grandeur, its towers broken like rotted teeth against the blood-red moon. Gargoyles leered from parapets, their stone faces worn smooth by centuries of rain. Iron gates hung open, twisted and bent as if torn apart by inhuman strength. Music she dismounted a safe distance away, securing her horse to a gnarled oak. From her pack, she withdrew her tools, a crossbow loaded with bolts carved from hawthorn and blessed in holy water, a bandolier of glass vials containing garlic oil and sanctified salt, a silver dagger with prayers etched along its blade, and finally her most prized possession, a stake made from the wood of a tree that once grew in the garden of Gethsemane, or so the merchant had claimed. The castle's entrance yawned before her like the mouth of some great beast. Serena crossed the threshold, her boots crunching on broken glass and scattered bones. The main hall was a cathedral of devastation. Tapestries hung in tatters, depicting scenes of courtly life now defiled by claw marks and dark stains. Furniture lay splintered music, as if a great violence had recently swept through. But music, something was wrong. The air didn't carry the oppressive weight she associated with vampire lairs. There was no sense of being watched by ancient hungry eyes. Instead, there was only emptiness and something else. Something that made her pause. The faint sound of crying. Serena's hand tightened on her crossbow. Music vampires were deceivers capable of mimicking human sounds to lure victims. She had learned that lesson watching her father die, his throat torn out by a creature that had called for help in a child's voice. But this cry was different, weaker, more desperate. She followed the sound through corridors lined with portraits of pale aristocrats, their painted eyes seeming to track her movement. The crying grew louder, leading her to a chamber that must have once been a nursery. The door stood ajar. Inside, scattered among the wreckage of an attack, broken cribs, shattered mirrors, blood splattered across fine silk, was a cradle. It was crude, hastily constructed from salvaged wood and covered with dark velvet mantles. The crying came from within. Serena approached cautiously, crossbow raised, expecting a trap. But when she pulled back the covering, her breath caught. a baby no more than a few months old, wrapped in cloth of deep crimson. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, with an almost translucent quality that revealed faint blue veins beneath. His eyes, when they opened, glowed with an otherworldly red light, like rubies catching firelight. His tiny hands reached toward her, and she saw that his fingernails were already slightly pointed. A damper, half vampire, half human. The folklore was filled with tales of such children, cursed beings caught between two worlds, inheriting the strengths and weaknesses of both music bloodlines. The baby's crying subsided as Serena stared down at him. Something in her chest, something she thought had died years ago when she drove a stake through her turned brother's heart, stirred painfully to life. Without thinking, she reached down and lifted the child. He was cold to the touch, but breathing, his small chest rising and falling with effort. Foolish, she whispered to herself. Foolish music and dangerous. But she couldn't put him down. It was then that she felt it, the presence she had been expecting since entering the castle. The temperature dropped further. Frost spread across the walls, and from the shadows at the far end of the nursery, a figure emerged. Music Lord Kyle Darvin stepped into the pale moonlight, streaming through a broken window, and Serena understood why legends grew around him. He was tall and gaunt, music moving with the fluid grace of a predator. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, stark against the darkness of his torn noble's clothing. His face was angular and severe, beautiful in the way that winter storms are beautiful, terrible, and mesmerizing. His eyes, the same unnatural red as the infant's, fixed upon Serena with an intensity that made her skin crawl, but he was wounded. Deep gashes crossed his chest, still weeping dark blood. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. He moved like a creature on the edge of true death, the kind that even vampires fear. Release him. Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, music, yet it filled the room like wind through a crypt. Release my son. Serena raised her crossbow with her free hand, an impossible shot while holding the baby, and they both knew it. Stay back, creature. I cannot harm you, Kale said. And she heard the truth in it, not because he was benevolent, but because he was too weak. They came at sunset, holy warriors blessed by the church. They killed Ara, he paused, and something flickered across his face. My wife, they burned her in sanctified fire. I fought, but there were too many. I hid him. I thought I hoped they wouldn't find him. Your kind don't feel hope, Serena said coldly, though her arms unconsciously tightened around the infant. We feel everything, Kyle replied, taking an unsteady step forward. We feel it for centuries. We remember every loss, every joy until the weight of it drives us mad or makes us monsters, sometimes both. His eyes never left the child. His name is Aldrich. He is 3 months old. His mother sang to him every night, and now she is Ash. Good, Serena said, but the word felt hollow. Kale's eyes finally met hers, and she saw in them something she didn't expect. Resignation. Kill me if you must. The Baron sent you, I assume. He wants his lands cleared. I understand. But I beg you. And here the ancient vampire who had brought Kingdom's music to their knees knelt before her. Save my son. Take him far from here. Raise him. Kill him. I care not. Just don't let him die alone in this cold room. The baby made a soft sound, his small hand grasping at Serena's finger with surprising strength. And in that moment, standing in a ruined nursery with a dying vampire at her feet and his child in her arms, Serena Valen made a choice that would change everything. I'll take him, she said quietly. But you're coming, too. Kyle's eyes widened in shock. Why? Serena looked down at the infant, then back at the monster who was his father. Because she said, surprised by her own words, he deserves to know who he is. And because I've never run from a mystery in my life. The journey from Castle Darvin to Serena's mountain refuge took 3 nights of careful travel through terrain that would have killed lesser travelers. She moved under cover of darkness. The baby Aldrich wrapped tightly against her chest beneath her cloak, while Kale followed at a distance. Weak, hunted, and bound by an agreement neither fully understood. The vampire lord traveled like a wraith through the forests. Music, his white hair a ghost against the black trees. He fed on what he could find. Deer, wolves, anything with blood warm enough to sustain him. Serena watched him from her campfires, crossbow always within reach as he drained animals with an efficiency that spoke of centuries of practice. He never came close to the fire, never approached Aldrich while she held him. He kept his distance as if proximity itself might break the fragile truce between them. On the second night, as sleet turned the path to ice, Kale collapsed. Serena found him an hour later face down in the snow, his body temperature so low that frost had formed on his clothing. For a moment, she considered leaving him. The world would be safer. The Baron would still pay, and she would have the child without the complication of his monster father. But Aldrich stirred against her chest, making a sound that wasn't quite human, a small hiss of discomfort, and she thought about what it meant to grow up knowing your father died alone in the snow while you were carried away by a stranger. Music she dragged Giles into a shallow cave, built a fire at the entrance, far enough that the light wouldn't touch him, but close enough that the warmth might reach, and waited. When dawn threatened, she covered the cave entrance with her heavy cloak, blocking out the killing sunlight. He woke at dusk, his red eyes finding her immediately. "You should have left me. I considered it," Serena replied, feeding Aldrich goat's milk from a bladder she treated with herbs. The baby drank poorly, spitting up much of it. His color was worse than before. "But your son isn't thriving on human food. I don't know what he needs." Kyle sat up slowly, his wounds healing but still visible. "He needs blood, not much. A few drops mixed with milk. Animal blood will suffice for now, but as he grows..." He didn't finish the sentence. "As he grows, he'll need human blood," Serena completed, her voice flat. "Not to kill, never to kill. If raised properly, a damper can survive on small amounts voluntarily given. There are ways." Kale's eyes held a desperate intensity. "I swear to you I can teach him control. My kind are not all mindless beasts." "No," Serena agreed coldly. "Some of you are very mindful monsters." That night she mixed drops of rabbit's blood with the milk. Aldrich drank greedily, his color immediately improving. His small eyes brightened, and for the first time since she'd found him, he made sounds that resembled contentment rather than distress. Kale watched from the shadows with an expression that might have been relief if vampires truly felt such things. They reached Serena's sanctuary on the third night, a stone cottage built into the mountainside, hidden by a waterfall, and accessible only through paths known to few. It had been her family's safe house for generations, a place where hunters could rest between kills, where weapons could be maintained, and wounds tended in privacy. The cottage was small but sturdy, with thick walls designed to withstand both winter storms and supernatural assault. Garlic hung in braids above the doorway. Music silver chains were embedded in the window frames. Holy symbols marked every threshold. It was a fortress against the very creature Serena was now inviting inside. Kyle stopped at the entrance, his face twisted in discomfort. "I cannot enter. You've sanctified this place." "Not all of it," Serena said, shifting Aldrich in her arms. The baby was asleep, his small chest rising and falling with the peaceful rhythm of the innocent. "There's a root cellar beneath. Stone walls, no windows. It was meant for storing meat, but it's never been blessed. You can stay there during the day." "A cage," Kyle observed. "A roof," Serena corrected. "Take it or leave it." After a long moment, Kyle nodded. "Show me." The cellar was accessed through a heavy wooden door in the cottage floor. Stone steps descended into darkness. The space below was roughly 10 ft square, with earthen floor and walls of fitted stone. Music, it smelled of damp and old roots. A vampire's coffin would have been more comfortable, but it would serve. "There's no lock on the door," Kyle noted, standing at the top of the stairs. "If you wanted us dead, you'd have killed us on the road," Serena replied. "And if you try anything, every weapon in this house is designed to end you. The choice is yours every night. Be a father or be a monster." Something flickered across Kyle's ancient face. Those aren't always different things. Over the following weeks, an impossible routine established itself. Serena cared for Aldrich during the day while Kyle rested in the cellar. At night, the vampire would emerge, and father and son would have their hours together. Serena watched, always armed, as Kale held his child with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd been taught about his kind. He sang to Aldrich in languages dead for centuries, lullabies from kingdoms whose names were forgotten, in dialects that predated the Christian conquest of Europe. His voice, which had commanded armies and seduced queens, now softened to soothe a baby's crying. "He has her eyes," Kyle said one night, cradling Aldrich against his chest. Elara's eyes. Before the change, when she was still human, her eyes were this exact shade of red-brown in candle light. She was human, Serena Music asked, surprised into curiosity. "You turned her. No. Kale Unk's voice was heavy with old pain. She was born cursed, as I was, the last daughter of a bloodline even older than mine. We found each other in a world that wanted us both dead. We had 400 years together, and now she's gone. He looked up at Serena and she saw tears, actual tears, tinged pink with blood sliding down his pale face. You asked me once if my kind feel hope. We feel everything, Hunter. We love, we grieve, we rage. We remember every face of every person we've killed, every moment of joy, every betrayal. Immortality doesn't make you stronger. It just gives you more time to carry your sins. Serena found herself unable to respond. She had spent her entire life hunting vampires, but she had never considered that they might be anything more than parasites wearing human faces. The possibility that they might genuinely feel, might genuinely suffer, complicated everything. She believed. "Teach me," she said finally. "Teach me about your kind, the truth, not the folklore. If I'm to help raise your son, I need to understand what he is." And so began Serena's education in the true nature of vampires. Kyle spoke of the curse's origin, not a demonic pact, as the church claimed, but a blood plague that had swept through ancient civilizations, transforming those it infected into something between living and dead. He explained the genuine weaknesses: sunlight that burned their flesh to ash, the need for blood to sustain their unnatural existence, the way holy symbols caused pain because belief itself held power in the world. But he also taught her the truths hidden beneath folklore's exaggerations. Vampires could not turn into bats or wolves. Those were legends born from their ability to move with unnatural silence and their connection to night creatures. They cast reflections, but mirrors revealed the truth of their nature to those who knew how to look. Garlic didn't harm them, but its strong scent interfered with their supernatural senses. Running water didn't destroy them, but it disrupted the magical energies that animated their bodies, making them weak and vulnerable. And stakes through the heart, Serena asked one night, her hand unconsciously moving to the blessed stake at her belt. "Works on anyone," Kyle replied with dark humor. "Vampire, human, or otherwise. Piercing the heart is generally fatal. What about love?" The question surprised Serena even as she asked it. "Can your kind truly love?" Kyle looked at his sleeping son, then back at her. "What do you think?" As winter deepened and snow buried the mountain paths, making the cottage truly isolated from the world, Serena found her certainties eroding. Music she watched Kyle tend to Aldrich with devotion that matched any human parent. She listened to his stories of the centuries, the loves and losses, the slow corruption that came from watching everyone you cared for age and die while you remained unchanged. And slowly, impossibly, she began to see him not as the monster she music was paid to kill, but as something far more complicated, a being of darkness trying to protect a small piece of light in a world that would destroy them both given the chance. One night, as Kale returned to his cellar before dawn, he paused at the stairs. "Why did you save me, Serena?" Truly, she was quiet for a long moment, Aldrich sleeping against her shoulder. "Because I'm tired of killing," she said finally. "Music, and because maybe just once I wanted to see if something could be saved instead music of destroyed." Kyle nodded slowly. "Then perhaps there's hope for all of us." As he descended into darkness, Serena looked down at the baby in her arms. Part vampire, part human, wholly innocent, and wondered what kind of future they could possibly build in a world that would hunt them all. If you're enjoying the story, leave a like, a comment, and music tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to reply. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, melting the snow in reluctant patches and coaxing green shoots from the frozen earth. Aldrich was 6 months old now, growing faster than a human child should. Music, his red eyes had deepened to crimson, and his pale skin had taken on a porcelain quality that caught moonlight like alabaster. When he laughed, a sound that had become increasingly common, his small fangs were visible, delicate as rose thorns. Serena had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their strange household. She hunted during the day, bringing back deer and rabbits that Kyle would drain after sunset, mixing the blood with goat's milk for Aldrich's feedings. She maintained her weapons out of habit, though she found herself cleaning them less frequently. The cottage felt less like a hunter's fortress, and more like something she hadn't experienced since childhood, a home, but the outside world hadn't forgotten them. On a morning when frost still clung to the shadows, Serena returned from checking her snares to find tracks in the mud near the waterfall. Boot prints, multiple sets leading toward the hidden path to her cottage. Her heart turned to ice. She ran, her hunter's instincts screaming warnings. Inside the cottage, she found Cale already awake despite the daylight filtering through the shutters. Standing guard over Aldrich's cradle with a silver knife in his hand, her knife taken from the weapon's rack. His skin smoked where sunlight touched it, but he didn't move from his position. 3 men, he said quietly. They've been watching for an hour. I heard them arguing about whether to wait for you or attack now. Church hunters, Serena breathed, recognizing the tactics. Someone must have tracked us from the castle. Take Aldrich and go, Kyle commanded, his voice strained. There's a cave system behind the waterfall. I showed you last week, remember? Hide there until they leave. And you, Serena demanded, already gathering supplies. I'll be their monster, Kyle said with a grim smile. It's what they expect what I am. No. Serena's voice was sharp. She moved to the windows, closing the shutters completely, plunging the cottage into darkness. We're not splitting up. That's what they want, to divide us and conquer. We defend together or we fall together. Kyle stared music at her in the dimness. You would fight your own kind to protect a vampire. You're Aldrich's father, Serena Music replied, lifting the baby from his cradle. That makes you family, and I don't abandon family. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine fully. Before either could speak again, a voice called from outside. Sierra Valen, we know you're in there. Come out and face judgment. She recognized the voice. Father Dimitri, a church inquisitor she'd worked with years ago, a hard man who saw the world in absolutes of holy and profane. Beside him would be trained hunters armed with blessed weapons and righteous certainty. What judgment? Serena called back, positioning herself where she could watch both the door and Kyle. I've broken no laws. Oh, you shelter a vampire. Dimitri's voice rang with condemnation. You've betrayed your sacred calling. The penalty is purification by fire. Aldrich began to cry, sensing the tension. Kyle moved to comfort him, but Serena held up a hand. Stay in the shadows. Let me handle this. She opened the door a crack, keeping her crossbow hidden. Outside, 3 figures stood in the clearing. Father Dimitri in his black robes, flanked by 2 hunters she didn't recognize. Young men with hard eyes and blessed silver crosses around their necks. I've killed no innocents, Serena said firmly. I've broken no covenant. Leave my home in peace. Peace. Dimitri's laugh was bitter. You harbor Lord Kyle Darvin, the scourge of Murrell. Baron Rothmer paid you to destroy him. Yet here you keep him like a pet, and there are reports of a child, an abomination born of unholy union. The child is innocent, Serena said coldly. And I take no orders from you or the Baron. Then you are as damned as the creature you protect. Dimitri raised his hand, and the 2 hunters moved forward, drawing silver-loaded crossbows. Serena's response was immediate. She kicked the door fully open and fired, her bolt taking one hunter in the shoulder. He fell with a cry. The second hunter fired back, but she was already moving. Using the doorframe as cover, the bolt embedded in the wood where her head had been. "Kyle!" she shouted. "Now!" The vampire exploded from the cottage in a blur of motion, his body wrapped in heavy cloaks. Despite the searing pain of filtered daylight, he moved with the speed of his kind, disarming the second hunter before the man could reload. But the effort cost him. His exposed hands blistered and cracked, smoke rising from his flesh. Father Dimitri drew a flask of holy water and flung it at Cale. The blessed liquid struck his face and the vampire screamed, a sound of genuine agony that made even Serena flinch. Kyle fell back, clawing at his burning skin. Serena fired again, this time aiming for Dimitri's hand. The bolt grazed his wrist, making him drop the flask. "Enough!" she roared. "Leave now, or the next one goes through your heart. You would kill a servant of God for a monster." Dimitri's face was twisted music with fury and disbelief. "I would kill anyone who threatens my family," Serena replied, and she meant it. The realization shocked her even as the words left her mouth. Somewhere in these months of shared nights and whispered conversations, of watching Cale sing lullabies and feed his son with trembling gentleness, Music the Vampire had become more than a mission or an obligation. Inside the cottage, Aldrich's crying had reached a fever pitch. The sound seemed to affect Kyle even through his pain. He straightened, his burned face healing slowly, and moved to stand beside Serena despite the cost. "My son," he said, his voice rough but clear, will grow up in a world that fears him, that hates him for what he is, but he will know love. He will know protection, and he will know that not all hunters are murderers, and not all vampires are monsters. He looked at Dmitri with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Can you say the same of your God's mercy? For a long moment, silence hung over the clearing. The wounded hunters had retreated, uncertain. Father Dmitri stood alone, his certainty visibly wavering as he looked between Serena, a legendary hunter, defender of the faithful and the vampire she protected. This is heresy, he said finally, but the fire had gone from his voice. This is complicated, Serena corrected, and complications don't fit in your doctrine. Tell the Baron his contract is void. Tell the church I've retired from hunting. Tell whoever sent you that Lord Darwin and his son are under my protection, and anyone who challenges that will answer to me. You're making enemies of powerful forces, Serena. I've been doing that my whole life, she replied. One more won't make much difference. Dmitri looked at her for a long moment, then at Kyle, then back at her. Something in his expression shifted, not acceptance, but perhaps understanding that some battles couldn't be won with holy water and righteous anger. You have 1 week, he said, music finally. 1 week to leave these lands, take your family and disappear. Go somewhere the church's eyes music don't reach. Because if I see you again, Serena Valen, I will consider it God's will that you be destroyed along with the creature you protect. Fair enough, Serena said quietly. The hunters retreated, carrying their wounded companion. Serena and Kyle stood in the doorway until they disappeared into the forest, neither speaking, both understanding that everything had changed. Finally, Kale turned to her. His face was still healing. The holy water burns, leaving angry red marks across his pale skin. You called us family. I did, Serena admitted, not looking at him. Why? She was quiet for a long moment, listening to Aldrich's cries, finally settling into whimpers inside the cottage. Because somewhere between hunting you and saving him, I stopped seeing a monster and started seeing a father. And because she paused, the words difficult. Because I've been alone for so long, and this, whatever this is, feels less lonely. Kyle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away music and placed his burned hand over hers. His skin was cold, healing, but damaged. Then we should leave, he said softly. Find somewhere safe, somewhere Aldrich can grow up without fear. Where? Serena asked. There's no place in this world for a vampire, a hunter, and their child. Then we make one, Kyle replied with fierce determination. We've defied every law of God and nature to reach this point. What's one more impossibility? Serena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the monster from legends, but a being who loved as deeply as any human, who feared us genuinely, who hoped despite centuries of reasons not to. 1 week, she said. We have 1 week to plan, to prepare, and to decide where 3 outcasts can possibly call home. That night, as Kyle descended to his cellar and Serena held Aldrich close, she realized she was no longer the person she'd been 6 months ago. The hunter, who would have killed without hesitation, had been transformed by an impossible choice in a ruined castle. And as spring continued its slow conquest of winter outside, she wondered what other transformations awaited them in the unknown future. The week passed in frantic preparation. Serena packed only what they could carry. Weapons that couldn't be replaced, herbs for medicine, silver coins she'd saved from years of hunting. The rest would have to be abandoned. The cottage that had sheltered generations of her family would be left to the elements and whatever new occupants might find it. On the 3rd night of preparation, as Kale helped sort through maps of distant territories, Aldrich fell ill. It started with the baby refusing to feed. He turned his small head away from the blood-mixed milk, whimpering with discomfort. By the following evening, his pale skin had taken on a gray pallor, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. His small body burned with fever, unnatural in a creature whose blood ran cold. What's wrong with him? Serena demanded, cradling the baby against her chest as Kyle examined him with growing alarm. He's changing, Music Kyle said, his ancient voice tight with worry. Faster than expected. The music Dampier transformation should take years, but his vampire blood is accelerating it. He needs more than animal blood now. He needs human blood. Serena finished, her voice hollow. Yes, Kyle wouldn't meet her eyes. Fresh, potent, the blood of someone strong enough to sustain him through the change. How much? Enough to weaken the donor, not enough to kill. But Kyle finally looked at her, his red eyes filled with anguish. It's too much to ask. Serena looked down at Aldrich, whose small fingers clutched weakly at her shirt. His breathing had become so faint she could barely detect it. In the months since she'd found him, he had become something she never thought she'd have, something like a son. The idea of losing him was suddenly unbearable. "Take mine," she said firmly. "Sierra, no, if something goes wrong, if I take too much, you won't," she interrupted. "Because you love him too much to risk losing the only person who can care for him during daylight. And because despite everything, music, I trust you." The words surprised them both. Trust. Between a vampire and a hunter, it should have been impossible. Yet here they stood, bound together by their shared love for a child neither had planned to protect. Kyle was silent for a long moment. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there will be a bond. My kind, when we drink directly from someone willingly given, it creates a connection. You would be able to sense my emotions, my presence, and I would be bound to protect you above all others, save my own blood. It's called the blood pact in the old texts. It's magic, ancient, and permanent." "Will it hurt him?" Serena asked, looking at Aldrich. "No, it will save him, then we do it." She set Aldrich gently in his cradle and turned to Kale, pulling aside the collar of her shirt to expose her neck. "Now, before I lose my courage," Kyle approached slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "Not the neck," he said softly. "Too dangerous. The wrist is safer." He took her hand in his cold fingers gentle against her warm skin. "Music, this will hurt. I'm sorry. I've had worse," Serena replied, though her heart hammered in her chest. She had seen vampires feed, had watched music them tear into victims with savage hunger, draining them until nothing remained but dried husks. The memory made her muscles tense involuntarily. Kyle sensed her fear. "Look at me," he commanded gently. When her gray eyes met his crimson ones, he continued, "I am not that monster. I have drunk from 1,000 throats across 1,000 years, but never without consent. Not since I learned that every life taken diminishes my own humanity. Trust me, Serena, I will not harm you." She nodded, unable to speak. Kyle brought her wrist to his lips, and she felt his breath cold against her skin before his fangs pierced her flesh. The pain was sharp and immediate, but not unbearable. What followed was stranger, a pulling sensation, as if something essential was being drawn from her core. She felt her knees weaken, and Kyle's free arm wrapped around her waist, supporting her weight. And then the Bond music, it crashed over her like a wave, overwhelming in its intensity. Suddenly, she could feel Kale's emotions as if they were her own. His fear for his son, his desperate hope, his centuries of loneliness, and beneath it all, a growing warmth directed at her that he had been trying to hide even from himself. The weight of his immortal existence pressed against her consciousness, and she gasped at the sheer magnitude of it. But she also felt his control, the iron discipline with which he restrained his hunger, taking only what was needed despite the primal urge to take more. It was like watching a starving man stop eating halfway through a feast, denying himself not out of lack of desire, but out of profound love and respect. When Kale finally pulled away, Serena's vision swam. He caught her as she sagged against him, and she felt the strange dichotomy of his body, cold as death, but somehow comforting in its solid strength. "Music, is it enough?" she whispered. Kyle's eyes had changed. The crimson had deepened to near black, and something ancient music and powerful looked out from them. "More than enough," he said, his voice rough. "Rest now. I'll care for both of you." She wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, but exhaustion pulled at her like a tide. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kyle lifting Aldrich from his cradle, mixing drops of her blood with milk, feeding his son with hands that trembled with relief. Serena woke near dawn, lying on her own bed with a bandage wrapped expertly around her wrist. Kyle sat in a chair beside her, Aldrich sleeping peacefully in his arms. The baby's color had returned, his breathing steady and strong. "How long?" she asked, her voice narrow. 5 hours, Kyle replied. "You gave much, but you're strong, stronger than most." Aldrich responded immediately. "The change has stabilized. He'll continue to need blood, but the crisis has passed." Serena sat up slowly, testing her strength. She felt weak but functional, and she could still feel it. The bond, a subtle awareness of Kay's presence, like a second heartbeat alongside her own. It was disconcerting and strangely comforting in equal measure. "I can feel you," she said. "Your emotions, it's intrusive," Kyle finished. "I know. I feel yours as well. Your determination, your fear, your music," he paused, "your acceptance. It's been centuries since I formed such a bond. I had forgotten how intimate it could be. Can others sense it?" Serena asked, worried about the implications. Vampires can if they look closely. Hunters with the right training might notice something unusual about your blood. We'll need to be careful. He shifted Aldrich in his arms, looking down at his son with infinite tenderness. But it was worth it. You saved him, Serena. You saved my son when you could have let him die. Why? The question hung in the air. Serena considered lying, deflecting, maintaining the professional distance she'd built her entire life around. But the bond made deception pointless. He would feel the truth anyway because he deserves a chance, she said finally. Because you both do. And because somewhere in these months I stopped seeing you as a contract music and started seeing you as she struggled for the right word, as someone worth saving. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Music when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. In 1,000 years, I have loved 3 people with all that I am. Ara, my wife, my son, and now he looked at her directly, letting her feel the truth of his emotions through the bond. You, Serena Valen, not as a lover, not yet, perhaps never, but as something equally profound, as someone I would defend with my last breath, someone whose presence has reminded me that even monsters can find redemption. Serena felt tears prick her eyes from exhaustion, from emotion, from the overwhelming strangeness of her new reality. We're a strange family, she said with a shaky laugh. The best families usually are, Kyle replied with a small smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Outside, the first light of dawn began to color the sky. Kyle rose, still holding Aldrich. I must go below, but Serena, thank you for everything. As he descended to his cellar, Serena lay back on her bed, feeling the bond like a golden thread connecting her to the vampire below. She touched the bandage on her wrist, considering the magnitude of what they'd done. She had formed a blood pact with a vampire, had willingly given her blood to save his damper son, had chosen them over her calling, her reputation, her very identity as a hunter. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like the first truly right choice she'd made in years. The remaining days passed quickly. They finalized their plans to travel north beyond the reach of the church to lands where superstition ran deep but authority ran shallow. Places where strange families might disappear into obscurity. On their last night in the cottage, Serena stood in the doorway looking back at the home she was leaving forever. Cale stood beside her, Aldrich bundled in his arms. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "A few," she admitted, "but not about this, not about you." Through the bond, she felt his gratitude, his affection, and beneath it all, a growing emotion he didn't yet have words for. She suspected she felt the same. Music, they turned their backs on the past and walked into the darkness together. A vampire, a hunter, and a child who was both bound by blood, by choice, and by something that might in time be called love. Music, the journey north took them through territories that existed on the edges of civilization, wild lands where kingdoms claimed dominion, but rarely enforced it. They traveled at night when Cale could move freely and Serena's hunter instincts were sharpest. During the day, they sheltered in caves, abandoned chapels, and once in the hollow of a massive oak tree that must have been ancient when Rome still ruled. Aldrich grew stronger with each passing week. At 9 months old, he was the size of a 2-year-old human child. His development accelerated by his vampire heritage. He had begun to speak simple words at first, then short phrases in a voice that carried an otherworldly resonance. His fangs had grown sharper, and his eyes could see perfectly in absolute darkness. But he also laughed like any child, played with sticks and stones they found along the road, reached for Serena's hand when thunder frightened him, and nestled against Cale's chest when sleep claimed him. He was neither fully vampire nor fully human, but entirely himself, a bridge between 2 worlds. The bond between Serena and Cale had deepened with time. She could sense his presence even when he was miles away, feel the pull of his emotions like distant music, and he could track her heartbeat across vast distances, know when she was in danger or distress. It was intimate in ways that transcended physical touch, and both of them were still learning to navigate its implications. They had not discussed what lay between them beyond the bond, whether it was merely magical connection or something more genuine. Serena found herself watching Kyle when he didn't notice. The way moonlight caught in his white hair, the graceful economy of his movements, the tenderness in his ancient eyes when he looked at his son. And through the bond, she sometimes felt his gaze on her accompanied by emotions complex and carefully guarded. On a night when fog rolled thick through the valleys, they came to the village of Blackthorn, a cluster of stone houses surrounding a crossroads marked by a gallows tree hung with iron chains. The place had an atmosphere of old magic, the kind that predated Christianity and still whispered in the shadows. "We need supplies," Serena said, studying the village from a hillside. "And information about safe passage north. It's dangerous," Kyle warned. "I can smell witch magic here, old and powerful. Then we'll be careful. Stay hidden with Aldrich. I'll go in as a traveler seeking shelter." Music through the bond, she felt Kale's reluctance, but he nodded. "Be safe. Call for me if you need help." Serena approached the village alone, her hunter's instincts on high alert. The streets were empty despite the early evening hour, shutters closed against the fog. At the village center stood a single building with light glowing in its windows. An apothecary, judging by the herbs hanging in the doorway. She pushed the door open and a bell chimed. The interior was cluttered with bottles, dried plants, and strange implements that made her hunter's training scream warnings. Behind a counter stood a woman of indeterminate age. She could have been 30 or 300. Her eyes were the color of moss, and her hair fell in silver-gray waves past her waist. "A hunter far from home," the woman said without preamble, "and traveling with interesting company." Serena's hand moved to her concealed blade. "I don't know what you mean." "Peace, child. I'm Morgana, and I have no love for the church that burns women like me. I speak only of what my sight shows me." A woman bound by blood to a creature of night carrying the weight of impossible choices. Morgana's eyes seemed to see through flesh and bone. "You protect a vampire's child as if he were your own. That's either great foolishness or great love. Perhaps both. Will you betray us?" Serena asked directly. "Betray you to whom? The church that murdered my mother. The nobles who steal our daughters. No, Hunter. I'll do something far more dangerous. I'll help you." Mona moved from behind the counter with surprising speed, closing and bolting the door. "Your vampire waits in the eastern woods with the child. Bring them here before my neighbors notice. This village has eyes, and not all of them are friendly." Serena hesitated only a moment before trusting her instincts. Through the bond, she called to Kyle, feeling his immediate response. Within minutes, Musicky appeared at the door with Aldrich wrapped in dark cloth against his chest. Morgana studied them with frank curiosity. Lord Kyle Darvin, if the legends speak true, and this must be the child, half of night and half of day. I've seen his like only once before. 2 centuries passed. That one became either a great protector or a terrible destroyer, depending on who tells the tale. "What do you want?" Kale asked, his voice cold with caution. "To offer assistance, vampire lord. You flee north, seeking sanctuary beyond the church's reach, but you don't know what awaits you there." Morana moved to a table spreading out a map marked with strange symbols. "The northern territories are ruled by Countess Vladislava Drasti music descended from the ancient Wackian lines. She tolerates vampires who serve her, enslaves those who don't, and kills any who challenge her authority. A damper child would be a prize she'd kill to possess, or a threat she'd destroy to prevent. Then we'll avoid her territories," Serena said. "Impossible. Her influence stretches from the Carpathian Mountains to the Baltic Sea. There's nowhere in the north beyond her reach." Morgana looked at them with sympathy. "You have 2 choices. Present yourselves to her and hope for mercy, or find another direction entirely." "What direction?" Kyle demanded. "West. Across the sea to the island kingdoms, the British Isles have their own supernatural hierarchies, but they're fragmented feuding. A strong vampire, a skilled hunter, and a dumpier child might carve out a place there. It would be difficult, dangerous, but possible." "How do we reach the coast?" Serena asked, studying the map. "That's the harder part. You must pass through the territory of the Crimson Abbey, a monastery of warrior monks who have devoted themselves to exterminating music supernatural creatures. They guard the western roads like zealots guard heaven's gates." Morgana traced a path on the map, but there's an old smuggler's route through the marshlands. Treacherous, especially with a child, but passable for those with courage and desperation in equal measure. Aldrich stirred against Kyle's chest, music making a small sound. Morgana's expression softened. "May I see him?" Kyle hesitated, then carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing Aldrich's pale face and crimson eyes. The child looked at Morgana with curious intelligence beyond his months. "Beautiful," Morgana whispered, "and powerful. I can see the magic in his blood. Vampire darkness tempered by human warmth. If he's raised well, he could be a bridge between worlds. If he's raised poorly," she didn't finish the sentence. "We'll raise him well," Serena said firmly. Mona looked at her, then at Kyle, then back at the child. "You know what people will say about you? A hunter and a vampire raising a child together. They'll call it perversion, heresy, and abomination against nature." "Let them," Kale said quietly. "I've been called worse for better reasons." "And you, Hunter," Morgana asked Serena, "can you live with being an outcast from your own kind?" Serena thought of her family's legacy, the honor and duty that had defined her life. Then she looked at Aldrich, reaching toward her with small fingers, and at Kyle, whose emotions through the bond radiated fierce protectiveness mixed with something that might be hope. "I already am an outcast," she said. "Might as well be one with a family." Morgana smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Then I'll provision you for the journey. Herbs that will mask your scent from tracking hounds. Potions that will help the child sleep during difficult passages." And this, she produced a small glass vial filled with shimmering silver liquid. "A ward against scrying magic. 1 drop on each of your tongue's music, and no magical sight can find you for a month. You'll be invisible to those who hunt with more than eyes." "What payment do you require?" Kale asked, reaching for a hidden purse. "No gold, vampire lord. Instead, a promise that when you find your sanctuary, you'll remember that not all magic is evil, and not all who practice it deserve the flames. The church and their hunters kill women like me for the crime of understanding the world's hidden workings. If your son grows to be the bridge I see in him, perhaps he can help change that." "You have my word," Kyle said solemnly. They stayed that night in Morgana's cellar, resting before the difficult journey ahead. As dawn approached and Kyle settled into sleep beside Aldrich, Serena sat with Morgana, learning what she could about the path westward. "You love them," Mona observed. Not as a question, but as a fact. "Aldrich?" "Yes," Serena admitted. "He's become like my son." "And the father?" Serena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know what I feel for Kyle. The bond makes it complicated. I can't tell where magical connection ends and genuine emotion begins." "The bond only amplifies what exists," Morgana said gently. "It doesn't create feelings from nothing. If you feel love, it's real. However it began. He's a vampire, I'm a hunter. It's impossible. So is a vampire caring for his child with more tenderness than most human fathers show. So is a hunter giving her blood to save a damper baby. So is everything you've done these past months. Why stop at impossible now?" Later, as they prepared to leave, Morgana pulled Serena aside. "One more thing, Hunter. The blood pact you share, it can be deepened. If you choose to be intimate with him, if you share blood during the act, the bond becomes eternal. You would share not just emotions, but life force itself. You would age more slowly, gain some of his strength, and he would become more human, able to walk briefly in daylight without burning. It's called the eternal bond, and it's the rarest form of vampire magic." "Why tell me this?" Music Serena asked, her cheeks flushing. "Because you should know your choices, and because I see futures, Hunter, and in the one where you both survive, you make that choice whether that future comes to pass." Morgana shrugged. "That's up to you." As they left Blackthorn before dawn, heading toward the marsh lands and the uncertain west, Serena Music felt the weight of possibilities pressing down on her. Beside her walked a vampire who had become family, carrying a child who had become her son. Behind them lay everything she'd once been. Ahead lay everything she might become. Through the bond, she felt Kale's determination, his fear, and beneath it all, that carefully guarded warmth that grew stronger with each passing day. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was willing to face it, not as a hunter alone, but as part of something larger, stranger, and infinitely more precious. The marshlands began 3 days west of Blackhorn, where solid ground gave way to treacherous wetlands shrouded in perpetual mist. The air hung thick with the smell of decay and stagnant water. Music and strange lights flickered in the distance. Will-o-wisps, according to local legend, souls of the drowned leading travelers to their doom. Serena led the way, using skills learned from years of tracking prey through difficult terrain. Behind her, Kyle moved with preternatural grace, Aldrich secured against his chest in a sling Morgana had provided. The child was eerily quiet, his red eyes watching everything with unsettling intelligence for one so young. "Papa," Aldrich said suddenly, pointing toward the mist. "Bad things." Kyle stopped immediately, his vampire senses extending into the fog. Through the bond, Serena felt his alarm spike. He's right. There's something ahead. Multiple presences, not human. Serena drew her crossbow, loading a silver-tipped bolt. How many? 5, maybe 6, moving in a pattern, hunters, not prey. They had entered the territory of the Crimson Abbey 2 days prior, following Morgana's smugglers' route through the marshes to avoid the main roads. But clearly, the monks knew about the hidden paths as well. "We can't fight them with Aldrich here," Serena Music whispered. "Too dangerous. Then we hide." Kale scanned their surroundings, Music his night vision far superior to hers. There, an old willow. Its trunk is hollow. We can shelter inside until they pass. They moved quickly but carefully, each step placed with precision to avoid the deep mud that could trap Music them. The willow was massive, its drooping branches creating a curtain that brushed the marsh water. Inside the hollow trunk, Music was just large enough for all 3 of them if they pressed close together. Serena found herself tucked against Kale's chest, Aldrich between them, their breathing synchronized to minimize sound. Through the gaps in the tree bark, she watched dark figures emerge from the mist. Crimson Abbey monks, 6 of them, wearing the distinctive red robes that gave the order its name. They carried weapons blessed with holy water, silver chains, and torches that burned with purifying fire. Their faces were hidden beneath deep cowls, but their movements spoke of disciplined training and absolute conviction. "The vampire scent ends here," one monk said, his voice muffled by cloth. "He's close. The witch's masking herbs are strong, but not strong enough to hide him completely. What of the hunter?" another asked, still with him. "She's fallen far to protect such a creature. When we find them, she'll burn alongside the beast." Serena felt rage flare through the bond, not hers, but Kyle's. His body tensed against her, every muscle coiled for violence. She placed her hand over his, squeezing gently, sending calm through their connection. Not now, not with Aldrich here. Kyle's tension eased slightly, but his eyes glowed crimson in the darkness, tracking the monk's every movement. One monk approached the willow close enough that Serena could see the silver cross hanging from his belt. He paused, head tilting as if listening. "Brother Marcus, check the hollow trees. Something feels wrong here." Through the bond, Serena felt Kyle preparing to attack. If they were discovered, he would have no choice but to defend them. But 6 trained monk hunters against 1 weakened vampire, a human woman and a child. The odds were terrible. Then Aldrich did something unexpected. He placed his small hands against both Serena's and Kale's chests, and suddenly she felt a wave of magic pulse outward. Not aggressive, Music, but concealing. The sensation was like being wrapped in shadow, becoming part of the darkness itself. The monk who had been approaching stopped, looking confused. "Strange, I could have sworn." He turned away, rejoining his brothers. "Nothing here. Perhaps the scent trail is older than we thought." "Continue west," the leader commanded. "They're heading for the coast. We'll intercept them at the river Music crossing." The monks moved on, their torches disappearing into the fog. Serena, Kyle, and Aldrich remained frozen in the hollow tree for long minutes after they'd gone, afraid to break whatever magic the child had woven. Finally, Kyle whispered, "What did you do, little one?" Aldrich looked up at his father with those ancient crimson eyes. "Hided us like shadows hide from light." Serena stared at the child in wonder and growing concern. "He's developing powers already. Dampers aren't supposed to manifest music abilities this young." "He's exceptional," Kyle said. A mixture music of pride and worry in his voice. "His vampire blood is strong, and he's inherited magical talent from Ara's bloodline. But you're right, this is dangerous. Power without control, especially in one so young." "We'll teach him control," Serena said firmly. "Both of us. You'll teach him about his vampire nature, and I'll teach him discipline and restraint." A strange education, Kyle observed with a hint of dark humor. Lessons in bloodlust from his father, and lessons in killing vampires from his adoptive mother. "We're a strange family," Serena replied, echoing her words from weeks before. Why should his education be normal? They emerged from the willow carefully, checking for any sign of the monk's return. The marshlands stretched endlessly in every direction, mist curling between ancient trees like serpents. "We can't stay on this route," Kyle said. "If they're waiting at the river crossing, we'll walk straight into them. Then we go around," Serena Music suggested, studying the landscape. "Follow the river north until we find another crossing point, then circle back west. That adds days to our journey, and the longer we're in their territory, the longer we survive," Serena interrupted. "Days don't matter if we're alive at the end of them." Through the bond, she felt Kyle's agreement, though reluctant. They turned north, following game trails that skirted the deeper waters. Aldrich rode in his father's arms, occasionally pointing out dangers, sinkholes, unstable ground, once a nest of vipers coiled in the roots of a dead tree. His perception was uncanny, as if he could sense the marsh's hidden threads. That night they sheltered in the ruins of an ancient stone circle, pre-Christian, judging by the symbols carved into the weathered stones. Kyle created a small fire using flint and dry wood they'd carried from drier ground. The flames cast dancing shadows on the standing stones, making them seem music alive. Serena prepared a meal from their dwindling supplies. Dried meat for herself, blood mixed with water for Aldrich. Kyle didn't feed, conserving his strength for when hunting would be safer. "Tell me about Ara," Serena said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. Aldrich should know about his mother. Kyle was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Through the bond, she felt old pain resurface, but also a desire to remember, to honor what had been lost. "She was born in the Byzantine Empire," he began softly, "when Constantinople still shone like a jewel on the edge of the world. Her family were vampire nobility, cursed bloodlines that had existed since before recorded history. She was beautiful, not in the delicate way humans prize, but with a fierce, wild beauty like a storm at sea." "How did you meet?" Serena Music asked, settling Aldrich in her lap as the child listened with rapt attention. "We were enemies first. Her clan and mine had feuded for centuries over territory and old grievances. We met on a battlefield in Anatolia, both of us leading our respective forces. I should have killed her. She should have killed me. Instead, we talked, and by dawn we had declared a truce, not between our clans, but between ourselves. The clans didn't approve," Serena guessed. "They were furious, but we didn't care. For the first time in my long existence, I had found someone who understood, who carried the same weight of centuries, the same burden of immortality. We fled together, abandoning our families, our titles, everything. We spent 400 years wandering the world, making our own path. And then Aldrich came," Serena said gently. Kyle looked down at his son with infinite tenderness. "We thought it impossible. Vampires rarely reproduce, and when they do, the child often doesn't survive. But Ara was strong, and she wanted him desperately. The pregnancy nearly killed her. But when we heard his first cry, Kale's voice broke slightly. It was worth everything. She loved him," Aldrich said quietly, the words surprisingly clear for a child his age. "I remember in dreams," she sings. Tears pink with blood slid down Kale's pale cheeks. "Yes, she sang to you every night. Old songs from her homeland in a language that no longer exists. She would have given anything to see you grow." Serena felt her own eyes burning through the bond. Kale's grief was palpable, but also his love for the wife he'd lost, for the son he was desperate to protect, and increasingly for the hunter who had chosen to stand beside them both. "I'll make sure he knows her," Serena promised, "that he understands the sacrifice she made, the love she gave him." "Thank you," Kale whispered. Then after a pause, "Sierra, what we're building here, this family, it's more than I ever thought I'd have again after died. You've given me hope when I thought hope was dead. I need you to know that." Through the bond, she felt the depth of his emotion. Gratitude, yes, but also something warmer, more complex, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. "Music, I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low while Aldrich slept between them. Tomorrow, they would continue their dangerous journey west. Tomorrow, they would face more hunters, more dangers, more impossible challenges. But tonight, in an ancient stone circle in the heart of hostile territory, they were simply a family, broken, strange, and utterly devoted to each other. And somehow that was enough. As Serena drifted towards sleep, her head resting against Kale's shoulder, she felt his cold hand take hers. Their fingers intertwined, living warmth and undead chill. And through the bond, emotions flowed between them that neither was quite ready to name. In the distance, wolves howled at the hidden moon, and 3 outcasts slept peacefully, protected by magic, by love, and by the fierce determination to survive in a world that wanted them dead. The sea was a revelation of gray and silver, stretching endlessly toward a horizon where sky and water became one. Serena stood on the rocky shore, breathing in salt air that tasted of freedom, while behind her, Kyle held Aldrich, pointing out ships in the distance. They had made it. 6 weeks after fleeing the marshlands, evading Music 2 more hunting parties, and surviving a harrowing encounter with a pack of werewolves, they had reached the western coast. The port town of Ravensmith lay before them, a smuggler's haven where questions weren't asked, and coins spoke louder than morality. "The ship leaves with tomorrow night's tide," Serena reported, returning from the docks where she'd secured passage, a merchant vessel heading to the British Isles. "The captain asked no questions when I paid in silver. And once we arrive," Kyle asked, Aldrich now walking beside him, holding his father's hand with small fingers that had grown surprisingly strong. "We disappear," Serena said. "Find a remote village far from cities and churches. Build a life where no one knows what we are." It sounded simple. It wouldn't be. But standing there watching the waves crash against ancient rocks, Serena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope for the future. That night in the room they'd rented above a tavern, Serena prepared Aldrich for bed while Kyle stood watch at the window. The child was nearly a year old now, but looked and spoke like a 4-year-old human. Music, his development showed no signs of slowing. "Mama," Aldrich said suddenly, and Serena's breath caught. He'd been calling her that for weeks now, but it still made her chest tighten with emotion. "Will we be safe across the sea?" She knelt before him, taking his small, pale hands in hers. "I don't know if we'll ever be completely safe, little one. The world is dangerous for people like us, but we'll be together, and that makes us stronger than any danger, because we're family," Aldrich said seriously. "Papa says family is stronger than magic or steel." "Your papa is wise," Serena replied, glancing at Kale, who watched them with that carefully guarded expression that no longer fooled her. Through the bond, his love radiated like warmth from a hidden fire. After Aldrich fell asleep, curled in the room's single bed with a threadbare blanket, Serena and Kale stood together at the window, watching the moonlight paint silver paths across the dark water. "I've been thinking about what Morgana said," Music Serena began quietly. "About the eternal bond." Kale tensed beside her. "Serena, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I've spent months trying to separate what I feel because of the blood pact act from what I feel naturally. But I've realized it doesn't matter. The bond didn't create my feelings. It just let me acknowledge them faster." She turned to face him fully. "I love you, Kyle, not despite what you are, but including all of it. The darkness and the light, the monster and the father, all of you. Through the bond." She felt his shock, his disbelief, and beneath it all a joy so profound it made her eyes sting with music tears. "I'm a vampire," he said hoarsely. "A creature that has killed, music that has brought suffering. I will live for centuries while you age and die. This love, it's doomed from the start. Unless we choose otherwise," Serena replied, "the eternal bond would give us time. Not forever perhaps, but longer than most humans dream of. Long enough to raise Aldrich, to build something lasting, to make this strange family real in every way that matters. Do you understand what you're offering?" Kale Unk's voice was rough with emotion. "The bond would tie you to me completely. Music, you would share my curse, my nature. You would become something between human and vampire. Not quite either, but a bridge between both worlds. Like Aldrich," Serena said, "like our son. And maybe that's exactly what this world needs. More bridges, fewer walls." Kyle reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his cold hands. "I have lived 1,000 years, and in all that time I have never met anyone like you. You're fierce and gentle, deadly and merciful. You saw a monster and chose to see a father. You took a hunter's hands trained to kill and used them to nurture life." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I love you, Serena Valen. I have fought it, denied it, tried to convince myself it was only the bond. But it's real, more real than anything I felt since I are than we choose this," Music Serena said firmly. Together, what followed was both ritual and revelation. They sealed the eternal bond in the ancient way with shared blood during intimacy, with spoken vows in languages older than Christianity, with a connection that burned through them both like purifying fire and freezing ice intertwined. When dawn came, Serena felt different, music stronger. Her senses had sharpened, colors more vivid, sounds clearer. When she looked in the cracked mirror above the wash basin, she saw that her gray eyes now held flecks of crimson, like rubies caught in storm clouds. And when she stepped toward the window where morning light streamed in, she felt only warmth, no burning, no pain. Kyle stood beside her, his hand in hers, and she realized he was standing in direct sunlight for the first time in a millennium. His skin didn't smoke or blister. Instead, it seemed to glow with an inner light, as if his ancient darkness had finally found balance with her human warmth. "We're changed," he said wonderingly. "Music, we're complete," Serena corrected. Aldrich woke then, climbing from the bed and running to them with a child's simple joy. "You're different, you're glowing, both of you." He was right. Through the eternal bond, they had become something new. Not vampire, not human, but a synthesis of both. A new kind of creature for a new kind of family. The ship departed on schedule, carrying Music 3 passengers who registered under false names. As Raven's mouth disappeared behind them and the open sea stretched ahead, Serena stood at the rail with Kale beside her and Aldrich between them. "What will we do?" Kale asked. "When we reach the islands, we'll find a place," Serena said. "Somewhere remote. We'll build a home, raise our son, and perhaps," she paused, "perhaps we'll help others like us, other outcasts, other impossible families. We could create a sanctuary, a refuge for monsters," Kale mused. "A refuge for those who don't fit the world's narrow definitions," Serena corrected. "Dampers, humans who love vampires, vampires who refuse to kill. Anyone caught between two worlds with nowhere to go." Through the bond, she felt Kale's approval, his growing excitement at the possibility. Music Ara would have loved this. She always dreamed of a place where creatures like us could exist without fear or hatred. "Then we'll build it in her memory," Serena said, "and in Aldrich's name, for all the children who deserve to grow up knowing love instead of fear." Aldrich looked up at them with his ancient crimson eyes. "Will there be other children like me?" "Perhaps," Serena said gently, "and if there are, you'll help teach them. Show them that being different isn't being cursed." The child nodded seriously, then returned his attention to the waves, pointing excitedly at dolphins that raced alongside the ship. Months later, in a valley on the Scottish coast, where mist rolled eternally from the sea and ancient stones stood as silent witnesses to forgotten magics, they found their sanctuary, Music, an abandoned monastery. Ironically, given Serena's history with the church, provided the bones of what would become Haven, the first true refuge for supernatural outcasts, Music in the British Isles. Word spread slowly at first. A dumpier teenager fleeing persecution in France, a human woman in love with a werewolf carrying his child, a vampire lord who had refused to feed on humans and been cast out by his clan. One by one they came. The broken, the hunted, the impossible, and found acceptance. Serena became their protector and advocate. Music using her skills not to hunt but to defend. Kyle became their teacher, sharing centuries of knowledge about supernatural nature and how to live with curses rather than be destroyed by them. And Aldrich, growing strong and wise beyond his years, became a symbol of hope. Proof that bridges could be built between any two worlds if love and determination were present. Years passed, then decades. The eternal bond gave Serena time that most humans never knew, aging her so slowly that she remained vital and strong while her peers grew old and died. She and Kyle stood together through changes that reshaped the world. The slow decline of superstition, the rise of rationalism, the industrial age that made people forget the magic that still lingered in dark corners. But Haven endured a hidden sanctuary where the impossible became possible, where love transcended the boundaries of nature and death. On a night 50 years after they'd first reached the Scottish coast, Serena and Kale stood together on the monastery walls, watching Aldrich, now grown into a powerful warrior who defended the weak and bridged the gap between human and vampire communities, train a new generation of dampers in the courtyard below. "Do you have regrets?" Kyle asked, his white hair now threaded with strands of dark brown from their bond, just as Serena's black hair bore streaks of silver white. "None," Serena replied honestly. Only that it took me 1,000 years to find you," he said, pulling her close. "And that even with the eternal bond, we don't truly have forever. Music, we have enough," Serena said, resting her head against his chest where a heartbeat now pulsed. "Faint but steady, restored by their bond, we have each music other. We have our son. We have this place we built. That's more than most people get in 10 lifetimes. Below, Aldrich looked up at them and waved, his face reflecting the joy of someone who had found his purpose. Music around him. Others like him trained and laughed and lived without fear. And in that moment, music standing on ancient walls with her vampire beloved, Serena, Hunter, mother bridge between worlds, knew that she had succeeded. Not in killing the vampire she'd been paid to destroy, but in something far greater. She had saved him. She had saved his son, and in doing so, she had saved herself. The moon rose over Haven, silver and eternal, watching over a sanctuary built on impossible love, defended by unbreakable bonds, and sustained by the simple truth that family, however strange, however defiant of nature's laws, was the strongest magic of all. And they lived not happily ever after, but purposefully, meaningfully together, until their time finally came. 3 souls who had defied death itself to prove that love could conquer even the darkness between mortality and music immortality. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me what impressed you most about it. Turn on notifications to always receive updates on future videos.